Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast dedicated to exploring the innovative minds and ideas shaping our transition to a circular economy. I'm Sabir Lakhani, VP of Product at Rethinking.
I'm Gar Pundit, CEO of LoopLayer. Today, we're thrilled to bring you an insightful and quite candid conversation with Andrew Ellsworth, the founder of Doors Unhinged. If you've ever wondered how one company can start to revolutionize an entire industry while tackling waste and carbon reduction, this episode is for you.
Doors Unhinged is no ordinary business. Their model is rooted in the circular economy, specializing in salvaging and reselling high-quality commercial doors and hardware. By doing so, they reduce waste, minimize embodied carbon, and offer cost-effective solutions to their customers, all while navigating the complexities of commercial construction procurement.
Now, we forgot to take a moment real quickly to address where you are.
Yes.
And so we can do that, but I want to put it in the context of doors. You've seen so much reuse in India. Yes. Have you seen this? I mean, what does reuse look like for larger building material objects? Do you see anything like that in India?
Honestly, I have not personally. Even when I was working here, we did not work too much in construction and demolition. I
Yeah.
think at least what I remember, they might be trying to create energy out of some of the waste that
Okay.
was coming out of buildings. But you know what I do notice while I'm walking around, the chair I'm sitting on was probably made multiple decades ago, and it's made out of high quality wood. And I don't know, I think the problem of not deconstructing and just doing demolitions is probably mostly the way things go here as well. But actually, I don't feel too knowledgeable to comment.
That's fine. I'd be curious then what we can report back on is,
Yeah,
I mean, maybe there's just more reuse and it's just more
maybe.
foundational. So something for us to consider and push forward.
Yeah, yeah. We should have more Indian guests and learn about the
Yes,
wild,
we
wild
can.
west of,
Yes, we absolutely can.
of the East.
Yes, yeah, totally. Well, what is fascinating about Doors Unhinged and Andrew is his team has identified the niche product of doors and turned it into a sustainable business model. And they didn't just stop at recycling. This isn't like, hey, give us your doors, we'll turn this into other products. This is a full-on operation of almost remanufacturing doors, where they have become the experts in hardware and logistics, making reuse not only profitable, but ultimately almost foundationally changing the model of which they take in doors, they then get all the spare parts, and they remake doors at a scale necessary for commercial application. And that's almost the rarest function in this model is for commercial application. And so ultimately, they're here to really change the norm in commercial construction. In our conversation with Andrew, we explore some of the more captivating topics where we focus on why doors and how they were the perfect starting point for a reuse-focused business, the challenges of breaking into an industry that is resistant to change, which we are familiar with on this podcast, and how Doors Unhinged is paving the way for other entrepreneurs to follow suit, not only in building their very focused circular economy models, but he also is very open to his own sharing of knowledge in the doors economy.
Plus, he shared his thoughts on the role of government policy, which we cover with a lot of our guests, and how it might impact their world and their industry. And as always, we covered what was giving him hope for the future of sustainable construction. And one of the key takeaways was why collaboration is key in scaling this movement. This episode is packed with insights for anybody interested in sustainability, entrepreneurship, or rethinking how we approach waste, especially in the world of building materials. So grab your headphones and get ready to be inspired by Andrew's journey and vision for a more circular future.
But before we get to that, we do want to take a moment to discuss our first Selling Circular partnership with Circularity and Trellis Group.
Hey Circular Squad, we're teaming up with our friends at Trellis Group to bring you the inside scoop on the hottest event in circular economy, Circularity 2025 in Denver.
If you're getting CES vibes, think about that, except instead of the Consumer Electronics Show, we've actually got 3 days of circular economy solutions. It's why we love Circularity, not just because it's the preeminent proving ground for circular economy breakthroughs, but also it's because where we actually meet many of our podcast guests for the first time. And they actually end up becoming friends.
which we love. So from April 29th to May 1st, Colorado Convention Center is going to be buzzing with innovators, policy movers and shakers, and circularity changemakers. And if you're there in person or online, our partnership with the Trellis Group has got you covered. So when you join in person, you're going to have inspiring keynotes, actionable workshops, and the ability to share great meals with industry colleagues. And then, of course, you can take those learnings back to your team. And if you're joining online, we've also partnered with Circularity to bring you live inside content from the conference.
You get to see Sabira behind the scenes, working the interviews. So use code C25podcast at registration for 15% off passes. But hurry, because again, as the conference gets closer, the prices go up. So grab your reusable coffee cup, rally that team, because we're all about building this future together, one reclaimed polymer / one circular partnership at a time.
See you in Denver.
I do want to start with your start story. We don't have to talk necessarily about the business model just yet. We will intro in with the business model. But I think there's a particular reason why you started with Doors. And I think it's an interesting segue into choosing a product lane and scaling from a product lane. I would love to know why you chose Doors. And then essentially, what were the circumstances of that model that you saw that were going to be beneficial to be working with that product long term?
Sure. So I actually want to step back because I kind of was like, I get this question all the time, but the question I think before that is like, why would you choose a product? Why do you feel like you have to pick one? Why did
like a single
I feel
SKU.
like we had to pick one
Yes,
product?
absolutely. Yeah.
And the answer to that is we built our business to really reflect the needs and the nature of commercial design and construction. And I had spent a lot of time around that space. I was doing green building consulting for projects, just like the kinds of projects I work with now. And so you just start to see like how the ecosystem comes together and how procurement works. And procurement in commercial projects works totally different than it does in residential projects, where a lot of projects, people are going to go to some showroom or they're going to go to Home Depot, and get builder grade stuff and like some of that. Not a lot of choices, fairly reasonable prices, bad service, right? All that's the opposite in commercial construction, where instead of you going into a place to pick out materials, the materials kind of come to you, right? And you have everything, the architect has everything at their disposal. It's like, oh, yeah, we'll pick from this and this. And then other people have to do the heavy lifting to be like, oh, here in this environment, here's what you exactly need. Oh, you have this unique situation or you're trying to do this special thing. Okay, here are those unique things that we have, and yeah, we can order those, and that's this product. And so you got to look like what the business already looks like in a way. So we emulated our competitors essentially, and the slot, the lane that we fit in, right? We needed to look like that and act like it, and that's heavy on service. And talk about things like warranty, just delivering that, understanding that it's your responsibility. And if you have any issues, like you have to come back to them with all these questions instead of them doing all the legwork and then being like, give me these items.
Right.
So with that in mind, it's like, okay, we got to pick a product. What are the choices? And so we've seen a lot of materials come through that are like really common, like ceiling tile and carpet tile. And you look at them and you're like, it's hard to get people excited about that. They're kind of beat up and dingy. They weren't that expensive in the first place.
Right.
And so you end up with these margin problems where you're going to put a fair amount of time into getting the material out, warehoused, cleaned, whatever it is, and you're not going to be able to sell that at full price. So how do you make money? You got to make money on volume. And so you got to move a huge amount of material to be profitable. Not a good thing for like a new business concept.
Right.
So we
Especially
looked.
something in reuse that might be labor intensive.
What's that?
Especially for something in reuse that might be
Yeah,
labor
that's right.
intensive at that volume. Yeah,
Oh
yeah,
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 yeah. So
yeah.
it's kind of the balance shifts from being high material, low labor to being like low material, high labor cost.
Yep.
And so it's hard. It's just hard to make money doing that. I think eventually we can get there, but we got to start with these materials that are higher margin. And so, okay, what are the high margin materials that are really common in commercial construction? Lighting, um, casework and cabinetry, and doors. Um, you get into, if you want to look at like high-end commercial food service appliances, that's an option, but it's not widespread. So it's like, okay, looked at these three material types. These were like the three choices I had. And its casework is like high value. Each run of casework is totally different. It's going to look, the colors, the shapes, the kind of the layout is going to be different and custom, and that's a challenge. Lighting. At the time when I conceived of this, lighting was right going through a technology transfer from fluorescent to LED. Bad time to be in the market of trying to take old stuff, because everyone's going to give you their old stuff and no one's going to buy it because they're all buying new stuff. So now the LEDs, I think, are really in the market, and pretty mature. I mean, they continue to get better, but you can probably get by with things that are salvaged and probably only 5 or 6 years old. So that's a better business model now than it was when we started 7 years ago. Doors, I didn't really understand it, but it made sense. I didn't really know the product that well. I've been around it, but I didn't actually understand the complexity of what we set out to do. And so doors went with, because they're like a lot of them very standard and modular. They kind of have this kit apart. So you have door frame and hardware that they're all manufactured separately. So they have this sort of kitting quality to it that they need. They like, people know how to make them come together. So you can kind of de-kit them and re-kit them in other ways. Using back of the envelope stuff, I knew that like people spent a lot of money on it, based on the projects that I had seen. I didn't understand exactly until I really got into it. What has really, I think, propelled us forward actually is the hardware component of it. And I said they are complex, and that you'd think that that's a bad place to start, but it has gotten us a lot of opportunity, because we became experts at the hardware by taking all this hardware off and messing around with it and seeing what it is and figuring it out. That we know a lot about hardware that I think a lot of people don't. And so because it's so complex, people tend to cede that terrain to you. Be like, oh, you're clearly the expert. You take care of this. In a way that you don't see really in other material types. So that, I think, would argue is serendipitous. What also was serendipitous was that we kind of started this really from a waste reduction standpoint and knowing we could minimize new materials, but embodied carbon conversation was like just getting started at that time. And so as that evolved, we were there as this fantastic alternative that's 98, 99% reduction in embodied carbon with not a lot of technology, right? We didn't have to like really like come up with the 22nd century material that was going to save us all. We're just like, it's these ones you've been buying that are kind of stockpiled in these buildings. So I think that's sort of the long answer to why doors.
Excellent long answer. I have a follow-up, which is, do you think it was beneficial you didn't know that much about doors? And you didn't, and I think why I ask is I often think sometimes we can overthink getting into a market and not knowing, and maybe knowing the complexity and being like, did that play into that at all? Do you think that was helpful?
Sorry, say it again. Finish your thought.
Do you think that was helpful?
Pluses and minuses.
Okay.
I think I'm a quick study, and so I was like, I'll just sit down and figure this out. And you wrestle with it until you're like, okay, I think I got it now. And So it took a little time, but I think not being really familiar with doors and not working in that space freed me from, I think, the conventional thinking that I think gets attached. And you know, you're
That's
so
what I was.
used,
Yes.
yeah, you're so used to doing it one way. So like there's a company in town that does what we do, but they're all new materials, and literally they order every single thing from the factory. They don't stock anything. And so they're like the exact antithesis of what we do, right? We want to sell from only what we have in stock and really not want to order anything. Um, they just can't get what we do, right? Because it's an absolute world away from it. And so we're not for every project. They're not for every project, but we've created that lane by I think in some ways not being so reliant and being really flexible and adaptable. And someone says, "Oh, I want to change from this to this." You talk to that company and they're like, "Well, we got to buy that new, so you're going to pay for that anyway." And we already purchased the other one. And I'll be like, "That's fine. I'll just switch these with the one that's over in the bin." And like they're like, "Really?" Because no one does that in that space, right? Everything is like essentially like made to order in a lot of ways. And so no returns, you know? So, I think there's definitely advantages to it. I also have a tendency to like, I mean, it's an overused term of sort of like being a disruptor, but I'm just sort of will walk into a space and be like, "Hey, you don't see me here normally. I'm just going to talk to you about something totally different." And you can get people's attention that way. And sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. Trying to talk our way onto projects, we have a way to elbow our way in that we don't necessarily follow all the rules. You know, you got to break some of the rules. And people will say, "Well, you can't do that." And then, you know, lo and behold, actually you can.
Can
So
you
it's
double
learning
click?
to know where you can and can't do rule breaking is part of I think the magic of like being in this entrepreneurial space. So
Can you double click on that? Who is the customer and how are you elbowing your way into selling to them? That is different than the status quo.
yeah, the customer's a tricky one too. And so they're unlike residential where like customer is like a homeowner, right? Pretty clear who that is. Um, we have a committee. Our customer is a committee. And so the committee, each person on the committee has a different role. So the architect, the owner, right? The owner has some stake in it. Maybe there's a tenant. So owner, tenant, architect, owner's representative, who's usually working for the tenant, general contractor, subcontractor, and then supplier. And so if we're the supplier, we have all these other people to deal with. So the owner hires the architect to make decisions about the design and like take what their needs are and turn those into a thing that can be built. So the owner has opinions, but doesn't like certain owners are different. Certain owners get really involved, like large entities that do a lot of construction are really, really knowledgeable about what they need. And they're like, basically lay out their needs to the architect. These are our standards. And the architect's like, okay, this is what they need. In which case that owner is more savvy. We can have a better relationship with the owner. In cases where they don't do a lot of construction, they're relying really on the architect to make all their decisions. So at that point, our relationship with the architect is more important. And the general contractor is the one that's actually buying it. So we have our PO, our contract with them, they write us the check, but the approvals of those checks have to go up this whole chain of command and then come back down, right? It goes through all these steps, 45 days, usually minimum, to get the approval, get the check cut, and da 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 da. So for the most part, general contractors kind of see that terrain about like what the products are to the architect. But they have their own requirements too. Is like reliability, Like, how real is this? Are you going to be able to deliver what's being asked? If I give you a contract, are you going to be able to follow through? Warranty. They hold the master warranty, so they need to get a warranty on those products. So each project is a little bit different. We have contractors that we work with that will bring us into projects and kind of recommend us through to the architect and to the owner. There are certain projects, we're bidding on one right now. We don't know any of them. And so we got to make a case that the architect never heard of us. The contractors, we only know like 2 out of 8 that are bidding on them. And then the owner's like, I don't know, so it's a little bit of a fight. And that's kind of the elbowing our way in, is like, how do we get through all these gates? Or really they're more like guillotines, that's like, no, we're not even going to consider you. Like, to get this back in front of the architect and the owner, you got to be able to like give a convincing enough set of reasons to it. And so
is that because you find that there's still, and maybe this is changing, and I'd love to know if this has changed in the last 7 years, 8 years, that there still is more opportunity, or people are still looking for the best way to say no to reuse? Do you find that that's a quick trigger? Do you find that that's changing? Is there a stigma that you are now sort of have mastered how to hurdle that barrier? Do you find that's still the case in that sales process?
It's predictable.
So
it is the case, but it's like, I think it's easier once you have a relationship. Oh,
yeah,
guaranteed.
you see it coming from a mile away. Yeah.
This specific project I'm talking about, we probably have a 20% chance of getting on this project.
Okay.
It's the owner has ESG commitments, and they ask the contractor in their bid to say what is your ESG profile, and how can you support us? And so I'm like, we got this. You don't have this anywhere else. I can feel confident. And so that's where I think, otherwise it would probably be closer around 2%. And there are tons of projects that are like that. It's like, and you just learn from the process. Franchises, for example. It's just like it's the whole way that is delivered is like, you have this corporate architect, but then you have this franchisee that's the local owner that has zero control over the design, right? And the contractor has even less control over the design. They cannot deviate from the specs. The corporate, if they were to, they'd have to get approval from the corporate architect, and the corporate architect and the ultimate franchisor is like, has zero reason to change their standards. Only risk, right? So
yeah.
That basically wipes out an entire like slew of a lot of retail in particular. That's like not even worth it. Don't even ask, because they have no power. The people that we would communicate with have zero power on it. So
that's a model I didn't even consider, of just the decision-making process that goes into that.
That's right.
Then they're just like, and then it's extra work for that architect or that contractor, master contractor.
But so here's the thing: we could have the exact products and we can have a better price, but the nature of procurement can completely lock us out of the project. This is a big problem on government projects because they are by nature open, right? Almost always they're open bid, right? And it's lowest. Usually it's a lowest qualified bid that they can throw out, like the people that they don't think can do the work. And so unless the architect has made an effort to really write products like ours in, like there's just like no real way of even knowing who's bidding on the project, and like I may know 1 or 2 people just by happenstance, but they're publicly announced. And if we're not called out, then like there's like, we have like, it could be some strange company from out of town that we've never even heard of. And so government in particular is like, it's not the products, it's the process. It's the process of procurement that is so complex that is by nature kind of locking us out. And that, I think, is one of the biggest lessons to understand, is like, how does procurement really work in this space? And I think that's what makes commercial building materials different than other product types, which for the most part don't have this level of complexity in how stuff is bought. Office furniture, office equipment, a administrative assistant is essentially empowered with a credit card to go buy that thing. Real simple procurement, right? Or maybe they can buy from one of three things. It gets so complicated with building products. Those are just lessons you just kind of learn from having to do it.
You mentioned like in town, or like the architects that you've had to create like a localized network. Has that limited your scale? Like, because you have to create these relationships, you have to create a geographical footprint, or are you able to do projects anywhere in the nation? Or I'm just trying to think of how do you maintain that kind of like network to acquire jobs?
Sales, right? That's the nature of sales. And so it is relationship driven. It isn't necessarily geography. Geography just helps because I live in Pittsburgh. I go to industry events in Pittsburgh. I worked in around design and construction for 25 years. And so I know people just like you, like I've met them. I worked with them in other ways. And so even that contact is valuable, right? And so how do we scale that up? And that's really a sales network that we need to build to be able to do that effectively. The thing that they want when we talk to them is they want to know how credible this is. Can you really do this? Okay, you talk a good game. And so the first 4 or 5 projects were like, well, we think we can do this. We kind of did this on this one door over here. Like the very first project we did was like 3 bathroom doors in like a nonprofit. And then the second one was like 2 bathroom doors for like this like local developer. And that it's like, you just got to use those as stepping stones to the point now we have hundreds of projects, can't even remember them all, right? And you can just be like, we've worked on this whole array of projects and we probably worked on a project in your office. And that like credibility and the their desire to de-risk the process. They want to avoid potential failure problems, right? That's like, this doesn't work because it was too experimental. And so to that extent, we've been very careful to not, we stretch, but we don't stretch so far that the potential failure could come, because failure is a disaster, right? Like you overstate what your capabilities are and then you don't have a way of fulfilling it. And then they're hard up at that point and they're angry because this thing is like this thing like comes together and it's like a vehicle, and all of a sudden it's like you go to get in and drive it and you're like, oh, the engine's not here. And they're like, what are you talking about? You've had 2 years to build this. Like, why isn't this here? Right. And so no one wants to be in that situation because shit rolls downhill from there, right? And it's like everyone is going to get dragged down from that. And notably it would be us and any peers like us. So we have a responsibility, I think, to the whole industry that every project we do is successful. With, there's minor things that like, oh, I wish it was more like that, or this one thing doesn't work. But that's kind of part of the responsibility of like de-risking.
I do love that reputational aspect you bring into this. I think you, Doors Unhinged, are holding up a banner for the industry in a lot of ways, and it's very cool to see. There is responsibility to that, and also strangely that's kind of bizarre, right? that somehow an industry that's trying to break through the status quo is reliant upon certain innovators to keep pushing, keep maintaining the fact that no, this works, this continues to work, and that somehow that would then somehow be the example set for really an entire industry. How do you balance that with again just trying to build your business? Or not think about it too much. That can
No,
also be
no, I think about it a lot. I think
it's just
they
a
work
bizarre
together.
pressure.
It is a bizarre pressure, but it's, I think, just gotten used to it. And I don't actually feel directly responsible for anyone else,
Right.
but I want to encourage them. And I want to, ultimately, the ability to have a whole ecosystem benefits everyone in our goals, but it still benefits us.
Mhm.
Because the more we normalize it, the more straightforward it becomes, and then we can get onto projects without having that depth of relationships. Whereas, like, you and your peers have clearly done a good job at creating this new approach that's not just like, hey, get this one material. It's, hey, let's look at material reuse, and here's a menu of options. We've always tried to figure out how we get the industry to that level, which ultimately will benefit us, but it's also going to achieve the goals that we set out, where, like, we can't do all the impact ourselves. We can't be the end point for total impact of commercial material reuse. We need more people for it to really be impactful. Like, the number of doors we sell a year right now is less than one large project. Okay? That's not the impact where we're going to stop, right? And so everyone everywhere doing this stuff is where we need to get to. And then it's just commonplace, and it's not risky, and it's common sense. I don't yet have responsibility for others because there aren't a lot of others there right now. I think if and when there are more, I have a responsibility to them in some ways, but they also have a responsibility to me.
Yes.
But with us having a probably stronger reputation, that it's maybe a little less going the other way. But it's like, people have asked if they can franchise us. And I mean, the short answer is maybe, but it's yes and no. It's like, yes, you can have this idea. No, you can't use the name, because you build your own business that's reflective of you and reflective of where you are and what your customers want. And that's how you should run your business, not some cookie cutter version of what we do here in Pittsburgh. And so if we decide to move into other markets, we have to understand what that market is and how they work. And you can't assume that it works the same everywhere. New York is a very, very different place than Pittsburgh, for example, as is San Francisco or LA. Yeah.
To that end of not just franchising, but starting a whole nother location. I'm curious, what is the thought on that? You don't have to share too much secret sauce if you don't want to. What's the geographical limitation, the logistical range of doors from Pittsburgh?
East Coast is, I think, totally achievable. I would say Northeast and kind of the eastern side of the Midwest, like Minnesota a little far, Iowa kind of far, Chicago probably doable.
Yeah.
Ohio, Indiana, I would say like the cost and the impact of freight starts to pile up a little bit.
Yeah.
And then there's sort of the logistical aspect of, like, needing to have some ability to provide a local presence if there are issues. Sending them to California is technically feasible. At a certain volume, it's even price competitive. But your ability to, like, be there later today, if you really have to, like, be there to solve a problem, gets pretty hard. So the solution to that is kind of having local partners. I mean, even New York and Boston is, like, can be a little bit of a challenge, but looking for local partners, I think, is going to be the solution to that. But ultimately, there should be a West Coast version of this kind of stuff, or capturing the northwestern area of the U.S. and then southwestern and southeastern. Right now we're working on a project in Houston, Texas, and that's cool for us. It's going to create it's going to allow us to learn how to deal with projects like that, and the logistics of it, and like everything that wraps around it. It's not just getting the product there. It's like what kind of support and understanding and field intelligence do you have to back that up?
Can I ask one more follow-up, Sapira?
Yeah,
On
that I probably didn't answer your question.
No. That was perfect. I mean, again, this is part of this is all understanding the supply as well, because that is the complication of the circular nature of this is you have to get enough product then even to send out. And so that's almost my follow-up, which is what is that like in terms of now balancing the demand, hopefully continuing to grow, and then you continually need that feedstock of used doors. You're doing both now. So not only are you selling, but then you now have to be supplying yourself.
Yeah.
What's the growth? What did that look like in terms of trying to figure out that, and I don't mean this as technical as it sounds, that internal algorithm of okay, we need to go source here to go output there.
Well, as you can imagine, it's kind of a peaks and valleys thing, right? And the name of the game is going to be inventory. And so inventory requires space, requires handling, equipment. But theoretically, if we can bring the costs down of acquisition, then it really balances out, and increasing our volume, right? And so it's sort of like, get large quantities and then you drain it down, and then you're kind of doing that. We still get most of our material locally in Pittsburgh. So lots of doors in this not that big of a town. But it's going to really only make sense to us to do large projects outside town. That's like a couple hundred to make it worth like sending someone out there, doing all the logistics, putting it on a truck. It's gotta add up. And I mean, the vision is ultimately you have these regional hubs that are like regional partners doing the deconstruction and bringing it to a local warehouse, and then when it makes sense, putting it on a truck and sending it out. And so that's cool. What is the in-between space between where we are today and what that is, in a way that's not going to be really expensive? Cash flow is still tough, and so renting whole warehouses in much more expensive markets and people, like, there's got to be a team effort to this, and it does have to pencil out, so don't know the answer to all those yet, but there's, I think, a couple different models that we could work with. And can we make arrangements where other people are kind of really leading that removal, and we're just essentially buying it from them? And
that's where I was curious is what are the issues in the deconstruction space, not like with the supply side customer and with the capacity and skill to do that. Like, how do you even know that a project is going to get decommissioned and there's an opportunity and now you can send somebody out there, but is there the skill? You have a small pool of people that can go deconstruct the doors, or is it a wide network of people? Is that space evolving?
It's I think it's lacking right now. There are people that are doing deconstruction. They're mostly focused on residential. So we lack this skill set. There's also the difference between, those are two different things as well, which is market intelligence of what projects are going into deconstruction, and then the people to actually do the work and take it out of the building and get it onto a truck, or to a warehouse or whatever it is. So we don't really have either right now, right? And we've done all of it, and that's kind of a vertical integration that as the whole market grows, the goal is to kind of break those into individual enterprises. And to make that worthwhile, you need to have a bunch of different product categories to like the market intelligence is the same. The customers that are buying the products are also the same. The logistics is going to be a variation of the same stuff, right? People to take stuff out, pack it in different ways, and put it on different trucks, or send it to a warehouse that then goes out to different places. So again, there's here's where we are today, here's where we could be in the vision, and like what is that gets us from here to there. I think we need more like brazenly stupid entrepreneurs to just like be like, I'm gonna do this, and figure out how to support them and make them work. It's hard.
What is the why behind the lack of the deconstruction skill? We've heard a bit about on the podcast. It's just not done. And are there opportunities for people to learn that skill?
I think there's two ways for deconstruction skills to deconstruction enterprises to kind of grow. One is to get paid to do the deconstruction, which is tricky, is much easier in residential space than it is in commercial space. There's very reliable outlets for lumber, bathroom sinks, kitchen cabinets, right? There's a lot of outlets for that. And you don't have vast quantities. You're having like one house at a time. In commercial, we have huge projects that move fast. Off the big projects are often union. And so you sort of have some labor issues that can come up. You also don't have reliable destinations for a lot of these material types. You're picking and choosing right now, carpet tile, ceiling tile. We haven't been able to kind of overhaul how demolition gets done. And I think getting paid, getting hired to do that kind of work is still an emerging thing. And it would be great to see that in sort of tied into ESG, and it's like, here's what we're going to do. But what's really going to drive the market, I think, is kind of the second way to make money, which is in the value of the commodity of the materials. And that is only driven by demand because they're worthless unless no one buys them. In fact, they're a liability because now you've taken them and you got to do something with them. Again, the traditional outlets that service residential spaces can take small amounts of that stuff, but it's logistically very difficult to then store, 25 pallets of ceiling tile or of carpet or of doors. That's just like, and when they're selling 2 a week, 2 tiles a week, not like 2 pallets a week, so how do we get there? I mean, that's the thing. Like, the ecosystem would work great if it was fully formed tomorrow. And it's the kind of the ugly, like, tadpole turning into a frog, right? These like in between stages that are like they're not efficient. They may not be profitable. They're still risky, but they're really necessary to get to that next level.
It is the most bizarre aspect that I think of circular economy is it just works better at scale. And it is hard to explain that to talking about procurement to a buyer who's maybe trying to find a solution where they're like, yeah, but this is cool, but I got all this volume over here. Like, I have all these projects that need to be done. And I think that's obviously what is, I think, most appealing about your start in this with Doors Unhinged is it was starting incremental successes and then continuing to scale that. So again, speaks to the power of that skew, but again, you can't do it yourself. We need more collaborative environments, more sort of ability to access more of that market intelligence. I see a thought percolating.
Yeah. So Sabir, you asked the question about like why we don't have this and why I don't have that. And I actually think it ultimately still comes back to risk. And it's like people, so there's really 2 types of risk. There's the risk on the entrepreneur of like, I have to like hire people. I have to have a space. I have to buy equipment, I have to invest in going and getting materials. Okay, and so that's a risk because that money has to come from somewhere. And how do I know that I'm going to be able to sell those? Then there's the other side of the risk, which is the projects. It's like, how do I know you can really do this? What happens if something doesn't go right? And so to me, the more I thought about it, the way we solve risk in a society is through insurance. And I know it sounds really crazy, but what I think the solution is regional. And I urge this kind of comes out of economic development. Economic development provide a lot of grants. Two-part kind of program, which is like a forgivable loan for entrepreneurs and insurance for buyers. So you have a pool, right? And like people like can say, here's the, you can pick an enterprise you want to start and you can draw upon this. It's not meant to like, it's not a $500,000 thing, but it's enough to get you started and do some experimentation. You shouldn't use that word in the context of this space, right? You know, people don't like the idea of their projects being a place for experimentation, right? But it is experimentation. We're going to try it out. Here's the money. If you succeed, then it becomes a loan. If it doesn't work out, you got to like document all the things that went wrong and what could be done better and kind of give that back. And the loan is ultimately forgiven. If the project doesn't work out, then there's money to go buy new versions of whatever. We had to do that, but we had to carry all the risk that if it didn't work out, we were on the hook to buy it, to buy them new material. Asking the entrepreneur to take all the risk is too much and is why no one is in this space. Asking the owner to take all the risk is never going to happen. They're like, why would I do that? Because I have no risk solutions over here. I feel like government has to be the one to saddle some of that risk because they ultimately can be the beneficiaries of a lot of the outputs and outcomes of it, which is job creation, reduction in waste, reduction in carbon, economic development.
And at their best, they have 100-year time horizons of making decisions. So they're for maximum output of constituent benefit. And so that it sort of feeds into that of like, okay, how do we think about this now? Thinking, no, we're going to be okay. We can make the decisions now that help plant trees for later.
Right.
Essentially.
Yes.
Yeah. With that, I mean, you nailed. There was a policy question that we always have because we're trying to figure out what policies. Yeah, no, and I think, but that is one of them, right? That's a great type of policy mandate enabling factor. Are there others? I mean, have you found, or do you believe there are other things that we could be asking for as a constituency to help enable this ecosystem to start to flourish?
I honestly think that the biggest thing that government can do is be the first buyers. And that's policy, but it's procurement. And so it's policy, I think, has a tendency to tell other people what to do. And this is policy that tells themselves what they have to do. And the problem has always been that the people that write policy do not work in procurement and don't understand procurement. And so they tend to write those things in vacuums and not really get into the nuances like, how would this really work? What are the barriers to getting these products onto government projects? And how can we dial the policy to have enough tooth, but enough of an escape hatch if like things don't go well? Because what you have to remember about the people in procurement, they're project managers. They have to deliver projects on time, on budget, on quality, and spec, regardless of what you give them and what mandates they have, because they still have responsibility to all these other departments that are saying, I need this space and I need it on this within these kind of criteria. And so if you're not responsive to that, you're not going to get anywhere with it. And so engaging and talking to the people that actually deliver projects, which are like these like really important and misunderstood government jobs. in the era of like who needs government jobs anymore, right? It's like these people are making the physical environment for government to do their work. So that's policy, but it's like not the kind of policy that policy people like to do. And it's hard, and it's way easier for them to tell other people what to do than to tell their own government what to do. And the optics of that are really, really bad.
Well, I was going to say, because that plays into risk on the government's end too, is then they're sort of taking on that risk, and they not necessarily being the first actor sometimes.
Right. Or then telling others what to do things that they themselves can't. Right? So it's sort of leading by example. It's helping to normalize and de-risk the whole process. I think they shouldn't invest too deeply in any one entity, because I think there's optics of that too, and we've seen the outfall of that. But they can give smaller versions of that. I'm talking like $50,000, which in the world of economic development is peanuts. Three forgivable loans of $50,000 and an insurance policy up to $100,000. $250,000, and you could potentially start 3 enterprises. Right? That's a win. I think that's a win. Who's gonna be the one to actually bring that forward? I don't know.
Well, on that note, as we head into the end of our time together, what is giving you hope out there? I mean, these are some really concrete ideas, which I really love. But what are you seeing that's happening right now that inspires you?
In general, or in policy, or in whatever?
In general. In general.
What allows you to sleep at night is, I guess, is where we can take that.
Wow. I won't answer that question. I feel like what excites me, and what I think is hope for the future, is that people are starting to talk about this and move in that direction without us having to be at the table. And ultimately, I use ultimately a lot. And it's like, I feel like I gotta find the synonyms for that. At the end of the day, I wanted to become a model, but not become the be all end all. And so getting people to follow in our footsteps, and us helping to guide them, is where I wanted Doors Unhinged to go. And so the proof in the pudding is going to be when we actually get more enterprises, because the reuse is not really going to happen until there are the enterprises there to smooth out the bumps. Anyone could have done this anytime in the last 50 years, and people have not. And I think it's due to it's all these things about risk and convenience and warranty and all this stuff, that you need an entity to smooth all that out. So we're getting there. I think there's hope for it, and people are like dipping their toe in the water. And what we really need people is to like eventually dive in, because it is really a dive. But maybe we can give them some life jackets, and that's like the thinking is like, what's going to make these entrepreneurs successful is demand and de-risking, right? Those are really the things. We're getting there. I mean, there's a lot of interest in what we do. There's a lot of traction, I think. And so I think we become a bellwether for the industry, and our growth signifies growth across, I think, the whole sector.
Well, what gives me hope is I can't seem to go to a conference in which Doors Unhinged isn't somehow mentioned. So that's how I shot Andrew an email the last time it happened. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm honored. I appreciate that.
It's good, again, because to your point, it's people pointing at you as some sort of beacon, and your team as a beacon, and saying, we can do more. And I think that is what actually gives me hope. Thank you for the time, Andrew. Yeah.
Sure. I'll just give you one more
Please.
Soundbite. And I say this a lot. The impact that we've had more than anything is that we've changed the nature of the conversation from vague circular economy theory to one of like, okay, it's doable, it's feasible. How and when are we going to do it? When are we going to start? Which is not where we were 7 years ago. Now we can talk about how does the process have to look? Which materials should we invest in? These are the conversations we really need to be having, and I think us continuing to do our work is making that possible.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew.
Sure.